Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to our Leadership Conversations series. This is yet another episode with exciting conversations with one of our leaders, and we hope you enjoy this. We will be hosting these visionary and insightful conversations with prominent and influential thought leaders of our country. And this is an attempt to capture the profound views of great minds and provide enduring insights on the leadership competencies required to navigate during these unprecedented and changing times. Our intent is to use these motivational conversations to create a bridge between the established and upcoming leaders across various sectors. So each conversation shall comprise of 3 exciting rounds: leadership story, hard talk, and rapid fire. Today's guest is Roshaneh Zafar. She is a development activist in Pakistan working in the field of women's economic empowerment. She set up the first specialized microfinance organization in Pakistan called the Kashf Foundation. And this was in 1996. And she serves as its managing director. And prior to this establishing this foundation, she worked with the World Bank in Islamabad for several years. Roshaneh Zafar is one of our first brilliant, one of the greatest minds who have worked a lot on women empowerment. So let's welcome her to our episode today. Acha ji, so welcome Roshaneh. Kya haal hai aapka? How are you?
I'm good, thanks. आप बताएं कैसी हैं?
Bilkul Tik Tak, thank you so much. We are really privileged to have you here as our guest for one of our episodes. So we're going to get into the conversation right away. And our audience is really eager to find out some of the answers of the questions that we will be throwing your way. So we're going to have 3 distinct parts to this. First, we're going to talk a little bit about your story. Then we're going to have some hard talk. And then we're going to end it with a rapid fire round. So let's start to become a woman leader. How is it? How was it? Tell us a little bit about your story.
So this is a very interesting question that you've asked, and many people have usually asked me, what is it like being a woman leader? And I really don't think myself in that context. It's not about being a woman or being a man. I think it's about having the ability to influence people's choices, or having the ability to change or transform things, or the way you see society. So I have never thought of myself as a woman leader per se, but a lot of literature, as you know, has come to light in recent times, where people are saying that there are female attributes of leadership and male attributes, and how these need to coalesce, and how women do well on certain attributes because that's what we are, we are nurtured to be. And men tend not to have those and have to develop them. So, for example, if you take the issue of collaboration, that's something that women are supposed to do much better than men. But I find it very hard to box myself in many of those. But let's go back. I mean, the question you're really asking is, what's the journey been like for me? Well, let me begin by saying that I was not planning to be in this position of leadership at all. When I graduated from college, my ambition was to find a job with a development institution somewhere, whether it was the World Bank or the United Nations or what have you. So, or prior to that, it was Wall Street, and I sort of debunked that and thought to myself, that's not where I want to be. I don't have those characteristics of wanting to make lots of money for other people. I really wanted to do something that could be more self-affirming for me as an individual. So that choice was pretty clear in my head, but I didn't really think I would be setting up an organization. This just happened by chance. It wasn't something that I had planned or something that I was building myself to. So a lot of times you end up doing things, at least in my case, that was true, that are thrust upon you. And when things are thrust upon you, then you're tested. And that's really what happened in my case, that I happened to meet Dr. Yunus, and this idea burgeoned. And as it grew, it made me realize that I would be setting up an institution for the first time in Pakistan. Nothing like this had been done. Being a pioneer, I hadn't even thought of myself in those terms. And being innovative and creative, and then working in an area where women don't have a voice, they're not heard. So how do you raise that voice? How do you make people understand that women can be credible, and they can run businesses, and they can make decisions, and that they need to be heard seriously? So it wasn't something that I was planning, but then, as I said, when it was thrust upon me and I had to test myself and sort of spread my wings, it was a very interesting journey that way.
Fantastic. So what about your hardest moment of, when being a leader? So any moment that you would say that stands out that was really tough for you?
Yeah, there have been many tough moments because when you work in the field and when you are running an organization that doesn't have what would you call a palette to work from, something that already exists. It means doing things on while you're hitting the ground running. It means coming up with new ways of thinking and questioning norms and questioning patriarchy. I mean, essentially, this was what the organization was doing. It said women matter to the economy, and everybody said no, they don't matter, they don't work, women in Pakistan do not work. So I think one of the the challenge that runs through everything that we do is changing mindsets. So I think the first challenge as a leader for me was to convince myself that this could work in Pakistan, that it was not just a Bangladesh centric idea, but it could actually work here. So I think for any leader, if you have an innovative idea, if you want to test the waters, if you want to change the way norms are, it first means testing your own norms. So I think breaking away from the stereotypes that you're supposed to face. For example, for me, I grew up in an urban environment. Having to go and understand how rural woman thinks was not easy for me to make that jump. But being a researcher and somebody who was very inquisitive as a person and who asked a lot of questions, it was easier for me to make that jump. But those challenges in the beginning were more related to my own mindset, that what was possible or what was not possible for women to do. The second challenge was really about, of course, as the organization grows, challenges change. The second challenge was really setting up an institution that was more systematic, that was more institutionalized, where it was less organic, where the distance between the management and the teams was there. How do you do that? Because if you are the person who sets an organization up, and letting go of your baby becomes very hard. So leadership also needs to know when it is time to let go and when it is time to let other people make those decisions and make mistakes and give them the space. So I think that's also a very difficult challenge when you start a small project and then it becomes an institution and then it grows. So the entire institutionalization and the culture that goes with it is something you need to also realize as a leader. And as a woman, at times, the hardest thing for me was to deal with, and it continues to be, was to deal with many of the what you would call the government or the public agencies, because they respect you, but they may not take your opinion very seriously. So as a young person who started this, having to deal with a lot of the public policymakers was a hard sell for me in the beginning. But then with time, of course, as you get gray in your hair, it changes. Then they're like, and you put on your glasses, so it becomes gray bhi ho jate hain, and then you wear your glasses, and then it becomes, that's another piece that makes you, people take you seriously. But those are some of the challenges that came. And I think personally for me, the hardest thing was when, because I was telling you, we run a field program, one of our loan officers, our frontline staff, was a victim of a robbery, an armed robbery, and she passed away. And I think one of the most difficult things for me was to go and tell her family that this incident had happened. So sometimes you start something and events like this set you back, and you start wondering why you're doing this and why you're putting people's lives in positions of danger. But then it also is an opportunity for you to change the way systems work. So as a result of that, we then completely changed our systems and worked on looking at ways of digitally collecting money from our clients, so that we could, or using other means of collecting recovery. So cash wasn't part of loan officers' handling. So out of every crisis comes an opportunity for change.
Absolutely.
So that's also another thing as a leader that you learn with time.
So, I mean, hearing your journey, and there is, of course, you mentioned, challenges and maybe at certain times adversity, and then you mentioned this story about losing somebody on job. And so, what kind of from this journey, as a leader, what is it that you have continuously learned along the way? What is it? A couple of things that you would say that these are the two things that I kept on learning as I grew, because there was a lot of hands-on experience. There was a lot of learning on the job experience. And then there was these adversities and challenges. What is a couple of, nuggets that you would like to tell us about from your journey?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, one of the things you learn as a leader is that you don't have all the answers. And
Absolutely.
humility and modesty is probably the biggest lesson that you can ever have. The moment hubris steps into your leadership, you've lost the plot, is what I believe. So I think building, I mean, even if you look at the history of leadership or you look at political leaders across the world, I think the people who have succeeded in their lives are the people who've made strong teams around them, who built those teams, who've actually imbibed, the ability to develop across the board within the people who work for them, who've given them opportunity. And I think that is really what makes leadership sustainable. If you can build leaders within your teams, because you're not going to be the one, I mean, you're not going to be here. I mean, mortality is something that we face every day. So we're not going to be here for
Whatever.
very long. But our institutions must survive, and the people who are to take this forward must survive. So I think humility and modesty is one. Building people around you is another, and having the right team and encouraging that team to make decisions. And the third thing I would say is always pushing yourself to do better and more and be creative and not becoming complacent. I think that's really, I mean, I started Kashf 25 years ago. It's been 2.5 decades. And I think these are the three things that have held us in good stead. Because the moment you start saying you have all the answers, you are not, you are going to become redundant, is what I believe.
So just taking a segue from this last conversation we just had with you. So, leaders face a big dilemma between, when they're looking at their teams, and you mentioned humility, and then you have to instill those values within your teams. And when you're comparing the character and the competence, and the one who is achieving very high and somebody who has a certain great character but does not maybe have the competence. So as a leader, if you could just tell me something, I mean, on this, when you are hiring or when you're looking at team members, do you tend to, I mean, forego one for the other? Do you get to keep a balance? Is it easy to keep that balance? And what is it you give more preference to?
I think I'm one of the lucky people who have senior team members who've been with the organization for more than a decade. So that is a indication of how the organization works in terms of building people and giving them opportunity. And you're not going to find the ideal person when you're hiring them, but
Sure.
there is a core that you must be clear about. And I think integrity, personal values, the background that they come from is very important when you are hiring people. I think these three things really matter. How do you test them? Of course, there's no litmus test to it, but it comes through your conversations. It's with time, who would have the right drivers for you as an organization, and those have to be critical in any hire you do. Competencies are easier to assess. I mean, if you're looking for somebody with an auditing or an accounting background or a technology background or a research or analytic background, those are easier to box. But when it
Gauge.
comes to those three attributes that relate to the individual, their values and their background, those have to sink in. I have learned my lesson the hard way. If those don't sink in with time, and those indicators you can assess, as I said, through your interaction with the individual. And you can get a sense pretty much. Once you have that intact, I think then, of course, investing in the person, building them up, giving them the opportunity to grow. And you have to have a lot of patience. That's what I've learned, Magdalene, with time. If you don't have the patience to build people, and it's interesting because when I have to teach my 8-year-old a math problem set, I lose my patience. But when I'm training my staff or I'm trying to engage with them, I have lots of patience. So it's very interesting. I'm trying to analyze this myself. Why is it that it's so hard to teach an 8-year-old as opposed to do trainings and change people's approach and build their analytic skills at work? It's just a very, very difficult
challenge for you.
Yes,
Working your
absolutely.
math skills. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to enter the second segment, which is our hard talk. And since we were on the subject of character versus competence, and we hear you that character is very important, which entails humility and integrity and honesty. Because CV के ऊपर तो you can see the competence, वो बहुत आराम से नजर आ जाता है, but जो चीज नजर नहीं आती वो character नजर नहीं आता है, वो over a period of time नजर आता है. So if we jump into a very sensitive topic, and that is a bit of understanding at workplaces, and you being a woman, you leading your organization, how do you manage or look at the challenges of harassment? Or also, how do people understand this? And if men versus women understand it differently, or do they understand what it is? And if such a case does happen, if it has ever happened, how do you deal with such a situation?
I think we have to be very clear that misogyny and patriarchy are part of our mindset. It's not about being a woman or a man. It's what we imbibe from the entire culture and society that we live in, which denigrates women. You know, the first premises. How many of us, I mean, if we were a group of people here right now and I'd ask them, how many of us, when we see a woman driving a car, what is our reaction? Our reaction is she's incompetent, because that's what we are told. So I think harassment is a very, very big issue. And the way I see it and the way we deal with it at Kashf is we see the elephant in the room and we talk about it, rather than saying it doesn't happen. So any staff that we hire, we have a harassment policy. We educate them about it. In our orientation training for all staff, as you know, Kashf is 50% women and 50% men.
Yes.
And many men and women have not worked together. They're coming from your degree schools in Dera Ghazi Khan or Miawali or Multan or Mardan, what have you. So they may have been to colleges, but they haven't really worked together. There's a stratification in society, essentially. So this is the first time that men and women are going to be in close quarters in office space working together. So it is our responsibility as an organization to take these issues up. And we take them up very openly. We talk about case studies of issues where harassment has happened. What does it mean? Whether it is even, messaging your female staff member on WhatsApp at 10 p.m. at night. Why would you message her? That is not acceptable. So we even talk about those little things, about messaging, about Facebook. If you become friends on Facebook, what does that connote? Is that allowed? Is that acceptable? So we are also taking up social media, because that's become a platform where harassment is happening a lot, and we need to educate people. So in our case, we take it very seriously. We have a harassment committee at the head office. All such cases come directly to me, and then we have a fraud and ethics committee that deals with it. Cases are dealt with very, very seriously. And, in these cases, it's her word against his. We all know that. People aren't going to harass each other in front of everyone. There are no witnesses in this usually. So that's where the issue comes. You have to look at the character, the integrity, the whole piece, the holistic view has to be taken of both people. And of course, in the harassment rules, we do give weightage to the woman's word, because for a woman to come out and speak about this in our society, it's a very difficult thing. So we do, and then confidentiality is also a very important issue. So this is a very serious matter, and it is the institution's responsibility and the senior management's responsibility.
So as the leader, you are involved.
Education is important. Yeah, and education is important in this. You can't just say that it's not going to happen in your organization. Of course it happens. It's happened in Kashf, and it happens all the time. But it's what the organization does about it. Because as I said, there's a morass of misogyny and prejudice in society. We have to constantly shave away at that mindset. And that takes a lot of effort. And it's a daily task.
What about other biases, like hiring women? Are women competent or not?
Okay.
They're going to get married, they're going to get pregnant. Should we hire them or not? And do they reach senior positions? So uske baare mein, if you can just tell us a little bit, in your organization, or as per se you, how do you look at that, and how frequently are women promoted in your organization? Because you just mentioned 50% are women. So that's fantastic. So go ahead, please tell us a little bit about that.
So, when we started Kashf, we were an all-women's organization. We didn't used to hire men. So till 2003, our staff was completely women. And often men would ask me and say, well, you talk about gender equity, but you're actually not gender equitable, because you're not giving us an opportunity.
You're not looking at men.
Yeah, so, and that made me think. It really made me think that an organization that's working for women and which is trying to create equity, gender equity for women in terms of access to financial services and economic returns, why should men be part of this too? Because it is everyone's problem. And I don't know if you've been watching that drama web series Charade, which has talked
Yeah,
about
the first
yeah,
episode.
the message. The message in it is very clear, and which I think everybody needs to hear, is that we're
Very
not
strong.
bringing up our men right. We're not educating boys. I mean, boys will be boys. What we usually say. अच्छा, अगर लड़के ने लड़के को मार लिया या लड़की को मार दिया, तो boys will be boys. It's all right. But what we are doing wrong is we are not bringing up our boys the right way, and it's really our fault as a society. That's the message. If you leave aside everything else, that's really the core message. So coming back to that, I realized that it was absolutely correct. Women's problems are everyone's problems and vice versa. So as men and women who want to make a difference, Kashf needs to give men the opportunity too. So when that happened, of course, we then had to come up with an equitable approach, and we said, okay, we will do 30% first. So then 30% of our workforce was men, and then over time it became 50%, and we said we are going to keep this. Now, we do that tier-wise. So what we do is at the business development officer level, which is the majority of our 3,500 staff, they're all 50-50. Then at the branch manager, the area manager, the new regional manager. So we make sure that at all tiers, we keep the bandwidth correctly, which means, going back to your question of promotions, we definitely make sure that promotions are merit-based, performance-based. However, they also have a gender perspective on it as well. And there have been cases, there are cases where we have had to take this up with managers, where they've done annual performance reviews, and we do a bell curve on that too, from a gender perspective, to see if men and women, if the median matches. So for example, if men are being ranked better than women, we go and question that manager and say, well, in your department or in your region, men got a higher ranking, and where is it happening? So it's very interesting. Usually, performance reviews are cut into two ways. So you have your quantitative key performance indicators, number of loans dispersed, amount dispersed, recovery, blah, blah. That's all very quantifiable. And then you have the issues that you were talking about, the attributes or competencies or qualities that drive you to perform your job. So what we saw was that on table A, which is the quantitative side, women were doing better than men, marginally better than men in performance. But on the attribute side, they were being ranked.
Which was subjective, I assume.
Subjective. Yeah? And which was, when you asked the managers, they said, but we are not sure if she'll stay after marriage. Exactly the point that you were talking about. So, then we had to educate the manager that these are not the lens you have to wear. You have to see the person as a performer and as their performance on both levels, not driven by gender. So then we had to really work on this. And we still have cases where this happens, but the assessment of all cases is done here then. So we look at the bell curves, and then say if there is a little skewed from gender, we go back to that particular manager and say, well, why is your bell curve skewed in this case? So I think asking hard questions on gender is also something organizations don't do. And I think the reason why female staff is not retained in organizations is because of that lack of understanding. And because, one thing that COVID has done, sorry, we are going off track, but one of the things that COVID has done is that it has changed the way organizations need to manage workspaces and need to manage work-life balances. And it has, the work from home notion, which we used to talk about, but we were not implementing, has actually become the norm now. And it's opened up a lot of space for women. But I personally think that human resource laws or policies are written by men. And it's time that we got down to changing them. Because things have changed. It's not the 9-to-5 workforce anymore. We're not going to factories in the morning. It's no longer the industrial revolution. It's the technological revolution.
Yeah, and we're talking about knowledge worker era. We're talking about the knowledge workers now. So that does not have to have a 9-to-5, time frame to it.
But unfortunately, mindsets are way behind.
So from your story, we just understood that though you've created a balance at every tier, there are still tendencies and biases which you can pick out. Absolutely. And you can. So the one last question I'd like to ask in this particular section, one hard talk question would be, what are the 3 mistakes or major mistakes that you have maybe made as a leader? and something that our audience can
Yeah.
learn from and maybe
Yeah, I
avoid?
think one of the challenges as a mature leader, somebody who's now looking at the twilight and thinking of moving on, succession planning is one of the hardest things to do. I think if I could learn from others on this, that would really be useful to me personally. But I've tried a couple of models and they haven't worked for me. And it has a lot to do with the cultural biases we face in Pakistan. You know, the usual approach is the name in the envelope, which is you find someone, you start training them, you start building them. That doesn't work in our culture because 1 year into that, the person starts expecting, okay, when do I become the CEO or when do I become the MD? And in our culture, this could work maybe in America, and it has. I've seen it. I was on a board of a couple of organizations there, and that's how it was done there. But that was one. I tried it a couple of times, and it hasn't worked for me. And in fact, it has been a disaster. But now what I'm working on is the leadership bench approach, which is build a whole team of people, and then you build the attributes, which is a longer term approach.
A pool of
See, a pool of people,
ready now
right?
leaders.
Yeah, which I think works more in our culture because then the competition is slightly different. It's not with you, it's amongst themselves and it's healthier. And then you're compounding it and managing it and overseeing it and putting people in collaborative pools and so on and so forth. Requires more work, requires more energy, it requires more time, but maybe it will succeed. So one of these, succession planning is still my pet area that I think I need to work on much more. And any ideas on this would be one. So I made some mistakes on those. I think the the second big, I wouldn't call it a mistake. It was a lesson in learning. I'm not cut out for the for-profit world, is what I discovered with time. I'm more somebody who's good at running, not-for-profits with the social mission, vision, and an impact or transformative, milieu, if you want to call it that. So many years ago, because there was a new law and it was very macho to set up a microfinance bank. So we also got pushed into that for many reasons. But I ran the bank for a couple of years and I hated it. Not because the bank itself wasn't a good idea, but because it was all about investors and how much money they wanted to make and the tension and the commercialization. And the women mission was getting lost in it. The gender issues were getting lost in it. So that for me was a learning, maybe not a mistake, but an opportunity for me to test my frontiers and to realize that I'm a transformative leader. I'm not a commercial-minded person. And I realized my limits also, that I could do so much more on the other front. And I think the third would really be related to, as you run an organization, as you grow, you sometimes make decisions on markets and products and how you want to grow. So one of now this is a very interesting thing because you asked me in the beginning about leadership attributes and whether there was a gender perspective to this. In microfinance, just to give you a little bit of context to our world, the moment we meet somebody from our industry, the first question we ask each other is, how many clients do you have? Or how large is your loan book? Or how large is your client base? And any conference that you go to, this was being asked. And I remember sitting in a room looking around me, and I saw that the organization that had crossed 1 million clients were mostly run by men. And the women like me had less than 500,000 clients on average. And that made me start to wonder, what was going on? Was it that men were better risk takers than we were? Or was it a system approach? Or were we more transformative in our approaches, as in we were thinking more about a client and their life, as opposed to a large number of clients and getting them outreach? So what was the issue here? And then I was pulled into this thing of growing very fast. And I think that was one of the mistakes we made about 10 years ago. We learned from it. For a couple of years, we really grew our portfolio very fast, and that created problems with outreach and the risk.
Relationships.
We corrected it. It became more a transactional relationship as opposed to a transformational one, which is what we are known for, because we really take a client and then we build them up. So that choice between small versus big, which was again a choice driven by most of the male leaders in our sector. But I got pulled into it too. And with time, of course, we corrected it. So now we call ourselves a boutique operation. And we believe that transformation is really what we believe in. Any client that we work with, we have to build their lives till they say they don't need us
Purpose.
anymore.
Your
So it's
purpose,
about
your vision.
transformation. Yeah.
Very clear, very clear. It's all about transformation. And I think that gets, filtered and cascaded down all the way to the bottom as well. That's great. Thank you so much for being so transparent about the learnings that you've made. And I agree with you. They're not mistakes. They're more of learnings. If you steer yourself or you tweak the mistakes, they become a learning. So now we're going to move right to the third and the last segment, which is rapid fire. So I'm going to throw a few questions at you just to get maybe a few names. And if you have, because it's a lot going to be feeling involved over here, you can tell us why also. That would be great. So the first question is, name two leaders who you take inspiration from.
Oh, that's an easy one. So Nelson Mandela would be one, and that's because of his humility and his positivity. And the other would be Dr. Yunus, who's been my mentor. And his amazing thing is that he inspires people. He's one of those very inspirational people, very simple. He communicates in a very simple manner, but it's inspirational. So that was an easy one.
Thanks.
And again, you'll ask me the question, why men? Why not women? That's a very interesting question.
It's all right. In fact, because I also am running and heading my own organization, so I myself do not think in men and women ways. I just think in my own way. And you're right. I could have, but I didn't. So that's all right. Maybe our audience will have a problem with that, but I don't think they would. And now maybe, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, people will be taking your name, because there haven't been maybe many women in this, especially in this sector or otherwise, to create that kind of inspiration. But thanks. The next question is, one quality of a top class team player. लीडर की तो हमने बहुत बात करी, अब हम टीम प्लेयर की बात करें. आप क्या ऑडियंस को बताना चाहेंगे कि टू बी अ टॉप क्लास टीम प्लेयर वो कौन सी एक क्वालिटी बहुत जरूरी होती है?
I think it's patience and the ability to listen to others' opinions, which we lack as a culture and as a people. And every time young people ask me, that's what I say. You should have the ability to tolerate other people's opinion. If you can do that, you'll be a team player.
Absolutely, because there are people from all walks of life and you have to work together. One unforgivable behavior.
Sorry?
One unforgivable behavior, something that you would never forgive.
Oh, I talked about that already. Hubris and rudeness. Arrogance, I cannot take at all, and it really...
Yes, you have. All right. And your happiest moment as a professional?
I think my happiest moment still goes back, it harkens back to the day that I convinced 5 women to take their first loan. And when I handed them their 5,000 rupees each, I'm talking 25 years ago when 5,000 had a lot more value. And when I went back the next day and they had started their businesses, and the happiness on their faces is indescribable. I still remember that.
Fantastic. You've already touched upon the next question, but if you were given a choice to lead any Pakistani company outside the microfinance industry or the non-for-profit industry, which one would it be and why?
It would be a TV channel.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, the reason for that is, we've been doing a lot of work on changing mindsets through the media.
Influence, absolutely. Paradigm shift.
So influencing mindsets would be my biggest thing.
All right, and coming to the last part, you mentioned COVID-19. It has been an unprecedented, crazy times. People have had to think literally out of the box and have had to do things which we have never even thought of doing before, professionally and personally. So any 3 lessons that you would have for our aspiring leaders and just public at large, that what could they do? What have they learned? Or what in their downtime? What is it how can they transform to become better people or better leaders?
I think one of the things I learned through the COVID crisis for me personally, and we'll talk about the personal and the institutional in a bit, was learning mindfulness. Really, Majbeen, it really, really changed for me. The little things that matter in life and, what we really should appreciate. So all that, that whole sense of mindfulness of how spending each moment and spending each minute was important and how you spend it becomes important too. So for me personally, that was the lesson. How good I've been at applying it, that's another debate. But that was really overarching.
The thought. You have to start with the thought. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The mindfulness.
Yes. And this on the work frontier, it was being really being innovative for us, providing opportunities from working from home and using, for example, we used to do a lot of our trainings organically, bringing people over from all over Pakistan to the head office, doing it all that way. Now we use Moodle. And we are doing it all, through technology platforms and online. So changing that, I think there's so much opportunity. So we don't see this as a crisis per se for us. It's more an opportunity for
Great,
change.
you mentioned that.
That's
So it's an
really
opportunity.
yeah, and that's how we took it as an organization. And that's how we are continuing. Of course, there are lots of challenges in all of this, especially for the people that we work for. They were people running small businesses. The lockdown closed their businesses down. Women primarily are working in sectors where they couldn't continue their work. Beauty salons, for example, or tailoring stores or boutiques where demand fell immediately post-COVID. So as I see it, this COVID has been a session. It's been more a women's recession rather than a recession, an economic recession, because it is impacting women more than it has men.
I can understand. So anything else you'd like to say for our young leaders of Pakistan? Any words of wisdom that you'd like to leave them with, be it in this time and the changing times and the new times that are coming up, and anything you'd like to say to them?
I think I would really like to say to young people that there's so much opportunity for change in Pakistan. And rather than looking at the glass half empty, let's look at the glass half full and move from there. Rather than criticizing the darkness that we see around us, let's go and light a fire somewhere and bring change. And I think that is really what can transform lives and transform our country.
Thank you so much, Roshaneh. It has been fantastic having you here. We are already, just by hearing you, we're already so inspired. And it's very exciting to speak to another fellow woman leader. Very excited. We are very happy to have you, and inshallah, we will be in touch. Thank you so much, and Khuda Hafiz.